All right, Cain, welcome to the Vertical SaaS podcast.
Thank you, Gavin. Pleasure to be here.
How are you? You well?
I'm well. We had a pretty good week this last week. The team and I we went to um an American Immigration Lawyers Association meeting down in Dallas and got we're honored with an innovation award. So we got the opportunity to join that, and then flew back home to Salt Lake and got to watch the launch of a ski film up in the mountains last night. So pretty
Oh,
good. Yeah.
nice, nice. Sounds a lot better than I've just took my dog a walk out in the cold, grey, wet London. So it sounds a little bit further than where I am. But so you're from Salt Lake in Utah. Well, look,
I'm from
it's
all over and other places, but yeah, I live in Salt Lake in Utah now. Although I will say last night it was a bit cold and raining actually, so I left like halfway through the film because it was outside.
uh,
So
uh,
yeah,
that makes me feel a bit better.
there I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best.
So like, it's great to have you on the show, man. As the Chief Legal Futurist at Filevine, you're leading the charge and transforming legal work through AI and innovation. When we got chatting a couple of months back, it was clear you've got such an impressive background in both philosophy and technology. And personally, I'm super excited to hear how you're shaping and excited to share with the listeners how you're shaping the future of legal tech for law firms and businesses across the US and Canada. So that was a very brief introduction from me, but I want to hand over to you for the listeners, Kine. Can you just briefly introduce yourself, who you are, who you work for, and what it is that you do?
Absolutely. So I have the best title in legal, I think, and the best certainly for any dinner party or cocktail or happy hour, right? So I'm the Chief Legal Futurist, and so the first thing people always ask is, "What the hell is that? What do you do?" Right? Um, I run a skunkworks team inside of Filevine, and so let me talk a little bit about Filevine, and then talk about what it is the skunkworks team does. So. Filevine, we do a bunch of different things, but the key components of what we offer as a software company are case matter management. We do document management, contract lifecycle management. We have e-signature, um, lead and intake tooling. Also, as I just brought up, tooling specifically dedicated to immigration. So we have a lot of different tools that touch a lot of different spaces. Most recently, people were excited because released a deposition copilot. But we serve thousands of different customers all across the legal sector. And my job running a skunkworks team is to essentially try to innovate outside of the main line of what our core product team does and is building all the time. So we get to take a lot of risks. It means we have a big appetite for trying hard things. It means we also fail a lot. So we have to have an appetite for a lot of failure of trying out new things. But my job is essentially to make sure that Filevine is always at the forefront of legal innovation and doing what's best for our clients. So, like I said, for someone who's obsessed with legal tech, I have the best job and title in the world. So that's essentially what I do.
Love it. And why legal tech, Kine? Like, there's a whole host of industries that you could have dipped your toe in, being such an expert in the AI field. Like, what was it about legal tech in Utah that made you move there and
Well,
start on this mission?
okay, one thing I like about legal tech is that if you a person like myself who constantly likes problems that are never solved, legal is really messy and difficult problem to solve. And lawyers are exceptionally opinionated users. So it's not like we have feedback loops where clients just say, maybe I kind of like it or don't. We don't tend to have that. We have clients who are exceedingly, excessively, almost to the point of exhausting a lot of people, vocal about their feedback about everything we touch. Um, and that goes from minor aesthetic things and where the position of a certain button is, if we change that, down to full feature functionality and wanting to give page after page of written feedback. So it's certainly something that I would say is it's a particular disposition you would have to enjoy it and want to stick with it. Um, but if it's your thing to solve endless problems that keep changing and legal problems, they're not static. You don't solve them one off, right? Because they're very human problems, and then there's different regulatory environments that come into play, different norms and the way the industry shapes. So if you like a really vigorous feedback loop with your users, constantly being told what it is people think you should do or not do, and you like really extremely difficult problems that put together users together with different regulations together with very high standards for delivery, it's a really valuable place to be. I mean, one of the things I tell people, Gavin, is that there's no way to work on legal tech and think, does my work impact somebody's life? I
Mm.
mean, if you're building legal tech that doesn't at all, what exactly are you doing? I would be really curious. But for the
Um,
most part, when you're working in legal tech, the stakes are really high. So we take that very seriously as a team, especially when we're doing experimental work. We have a really high standard that our clients hold us to because they are holding that line for their clients. So the stakes are high too. So if you like that kind of work and being under that kind of stress, which I have found that is really somehow good for my brain, then it works really well.
and really rudimentary question, but like, how do you define legal tech? And we love a buzzword in tech. We
Yeah.
can do it with every industry, but I think we just throw it around. But like for you, what is legal tech, and I guess how important is the role now of a legal tech in this current climate post COVID for law firms and other
Yes.
businesses?
So I would take an old like American pragmatist approach to this, which is legal tech is tech that lawyers use. I
Mm,
mean that that sounds kind of simplistic, right? But I usually start at that point. If lawyers are touching the tooling at some point, then it's some kind of legal tech. That doesn't always hold, but for the most part, that's a pretty good stick. I think that the most interesting thing going on right now is that historically you had some really rigid categories of what legal tech was,
mhm,
right? So, and I kind of mentioned and rolled some of those off in the beginning about what Filevine did. You had uh, companies doing strictly legal research, right? Like a Westlaw, Lexis
mhm,
style approach, right? And then you have case matter management, like what was Filevine's core, and document management with other companies, and then your e-signature tools and your e-discovery tools. And those boxes were pretty rigid. I think what's gotten most interesting is in the last few years, the confluence of tech being everywhere post-COVID, plus AI coming out in a big way in legal tech, is that those categories are getting really fuzzy. And I
mhm.
think that's really healthy for everybody. It's like, so one of the questions, we're looking at in the work that our users do is they're all the time challenging us of like, why do I have to do this work in this particular module as opposed to here? Is there really a necessity if the tech we're using, the processing power we have makes it easier to move from one module to another, the kinds of lines between this is where you do this bit of legal work and this is where you do this bit of I think a lot of that is getting fuzzy, and I think that's really good for the industry because it means people are starting to rethink the way they thought this is where the signature tool lives, for example, and permanently happens, or this is where the intake review and triage work happens. Um, so I would say that the most interesting thing going on right now is that it's been a bit of a mess. And I think that's making people want to make more deliberate decisions about the tech they build, as opposed to this is where it would have traditionally fit. Let's go ahead and cycle it into that category. And then I know what category it fits into and what it's up against, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, when we got chatting, it was obvious that last year was, by the sounds of it, and this year was your busiest year in your career, where you got to speak about AI and law. I think you said a couple of years ago you attended like 10 conferences, and last year was like 52 or something. Like,
Yeah, so it kind of went out of control. It was essentially that I think what happened is that there's been companies producing, working with people researching like myself AI for years in and around the space. Um, one thing that happened with the release of ChatGPT is that it didn't just enter the public imagination. I think the legal
Mm-hmm.
imagination, because it was a language-based platform and interaction with the chatbot, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's part of what made it feel very inevitable to lawyers that somehow this is going to touch my work because everybody thinks traditionally about legal work as the tools of the trade are your words. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it very immediately had people had a sense of, hey, this is definitely going to impact our work because it's so deeply embedded in language. Um, if it had been a tool that worked in a different way, maybe it wouldn't have, bloomed in legal consciousness just as quickly as it did. But on the basis of the fact that the interaction was all language based, it made it pretty hard for lawyers to think they would avoid it.
And when you're speaking at the events, what do you find you're asked to speak about mostly? Is it just how, is it really around just how can we leverage AI? Is that the crux of it? Or is it a little bit deeper in terms of categories that you're being asked to
It's
consistently
deeper
speak
in
about?
terms of categories, yeah, because I would say it's different than other cycles in legal tech.
Mhm.
So, a past one that probably was far less interesting was, a couple of years of should we be talking about crypto and everybody trying to figure out what was a blockchain. Um, and not the most exciting period in legal tech. Thankfully, there weren't a lot of tools released on top of that. But
Yeah.
the no, the bar associations and the different groups I've spoken to have been very thoughtful about um, ways that people can start utilizing AI, what to expect in the future. And then I think one of the most important things was like pitfalls and things to avoid. So and I think one of the ways that most organizations and the bars here have done that, which I really like the approach, has been instead of trying to just scare people off of what does this mean? Is it the downfall of our profession? Should we all get scared and get in a bunker, just hoard fees until we're all put out of business? Instead of that kind of mindset, it's been really how do we leverage this? How do we make this a better experience? Upskill the people on our team, put out better work for our clients, but then also what are things, that we should avoid. So
Mm.
one of the things everywhere I go around to and say, hey, if the new associate John says, hey, I found this free tool online that says it does amazing AI from a plugin in your Chrome browser, no disrespect to plugins in Chrome browser, but same rules apply as social media era of please let's not let's avoid the free tooling. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Nice. And coming back to, I guess, Filevine, the key innovations, it seems like in the past week or so, there's
Yeah.
been some really, really interesting Gen AI products that you've released. I think you mentioned
Yeah.
one, the Copilot Litigator. Like, what are, so founded in almost 10 years ago. So on the face of it, Filevine, raised north of 200 million, rapid growth, expansion of AI tools, record customer growth. You launched the university, you've overcome global slowdown, you've moved into a new office. So in the last few years, it's like, who is Filevine? But actually, it's
Mhm.
been a 10-year journey.
Yeah.
So, what is it that you think's been key, is from, I know you've not been there since the beginning. However,
Mhm.
I'm sure you've got a good grasp of it, what you feel are
Yeah.
some of the key innovations and I guess cultural aspects of the business that has really elevated you as a legal tech amongst a lot of others.
So I have a long-standing theory within legal tech about what makes legal tech providers successful or not. It's my
Right.
theory. It's not one that I've seen data on, and I would be hard pressed to figure out how you'd produce it. But my personal theory about this is the way that companies like Filevine become successful is through out hustling the rest of the field. I think that legal tech, because of the things I mentioned earlier about how demanding the client base is, I
Hmm.
see a lot of companies that come in, they're hot, they're innovative, they're full of interesting people. They get scared off by how intense the client base is,
Yeah.
and they kind of hollow out the innovation because they get into a defensive posture with their own client base. So that's one thing that I think happens is that people get scared off. The other thing is that A lot of people historically really worried about getting into legal tech just because they found it very difficult to sell into legal. So
Yeah.
there are really two things that happen, which is that one, we have an incredibly, I don't know the right adjective, but I mean, it smells like gym socks in here. We hustle hard. We go hard all the time. Um, and so we self-select for that. And the people who stay around are people who really get obsessed with this stuff and really want to do it long term. Like, I always tell someone if they're interviewing for a position, I say, if you don't feel like you could get obsessed with legal tech and our clients and what they do
Mhm.
something else. Like, there's so many different areas you could get into. If this isn't your obsession, it's probably not a great fit. Um, so we try to get other people who are obsessives, and the obsessives around here tend to be as crazy about the products they're building on their different teams as the clients who use them.
Mhm.
So we focus on that. The other thing we do, like I said, is we push ourselves hard with innovation. Um, the Depot Copilot that you just mentioned, that kind of tool, I'll explain just very briefly what it is and then talk about how that evolves from a kind of Filevine mentality of how we build
And
things.
and I
Oh,
think
go ahead.
also to add to that, how do you see that having such a big potential impact on the legal tech as well sector?
Yeah, absolutely. So, something like Depot Copilot. Depot Copilot, essentially what's happening is that you are getting a almost live in real time review of your depositions. So what you're doing is you're going in beforehand, you're giving our AI a set of goals that you want to achieve during the deposition. You're feeding it documents that you probably have in Filevine that are related to the deposition. So you're trying to have it there as a kind of coach buddy review mechanism that's working live on the fly, and then essentially every few minutes at the normal cadence where you'd have a break in a deposition, it's giving you all of the transcript and text, and then trying to evaluate whether you hit those objectives or not in the questions that were asked and the way they're answered. So couple of things that are happening there, and yeah, I can talk about how that impacts litigators, and then also about how that reflects the Fileline philosophy, which is that everything we build, we try to build into workflows of the attorneys who are on our platform.
Mm.
So workflow is a kind of constant obsession. If a tool has to kind of be pulled off the shelf in a way that's very unnatural to the way you normally produce work in your firm or your organization, our assumption is it's not going to be very sticky, not get a lot of use, and not do much for you. So we're always trying to build into ways that give people more modalities or ways to interact with their data, and ways to do that that aren't multiple new panes of glass or screens for them to look at.
Mm.
So we do try to centralize most of what we build into Filevine Core, as we call it, so that it is more of a single pane of glass experience. And I think this kind of live interaction for attorneys, there's a lot of reasons why something like that has almost a gamified feel is really compelling within legal. So a lot of things, especially if it's litigation, there's just a lot that fits together with the idea of having, an AI that can act as the combatant with you, either joining in as a team or prepping you by going hard against what you're saying. So I think it fits well with that kind of structure. And then having the live review, the idea is, most often with depositions, you don't get a bunch of chances at this. If
Mm.
the AI can help save you to make sure you ask the question you meant to ask or get the kind of answer you're looking for, knowing in real time is extremely valuable. And I think that our clients, if anything, they place a premium on their time, and that's for everybody in professional services, right? And
Okay.
so if it's accelerating time to value for their own clients, then it's a win. And I think those kinds of things with legal, where live contemporaneous engagements with the AI can be happening, those are really valuable. And then just as a broader point, Gavin, I'd say that my biggest thought is that what AI is bringing that's most important is not just fun widgets that make fun sounding text and can give us cute responses in a chat environment, but really to engage more of our person. in the legal work. So whether that's audio, like with this new tool, or with visual tools, reading off documents, or getting back to dictation and other things, like engaging more of the attorney in the legal work is going to make for better legal work overall and hopefully
Mm.
better outcomes for people's clients. Like I just think that um, you know, the tech of the last 15, 20 years is pretty stale to just say everything's a keyboard and a screen. I mean, we'll have little variations of that, but it's like keyboard, screen, keyboard, screen. The best part of what's happening right now is, can we move beyond that? Can we have engagement with other parts of your person, in this case, your voice, and things. And I think that gives that richer embodiment of the work, gives people a stronger interaction. There's a reason why gaming culture over the past 30 years has developed in the following that it has, but also the success it's had as a platform style. If we
Mm.
think about the way people engage with their games, they feel very compelled to keep playing, keep going, and involved. And I don't think it's just entertainment aspect. I think it's the fact that it's so compelling by involving so much of a person in it, as opposed to just like a film. So I think if you think
Mm.
about the same thing with legal tech and say, shift your keyboard and the screen, there's a lot more we can do, a lot further we can go to engage the whole attorney in the experience and make them feel more engaged with their client, hopefully make the outcomes better.
I mean, it just sounds like a no-brainer pre-COVID anyway, because again, on our initial pre-pod call, I was telling you about my pains when I was working for a law firm before I got into recruitment and doing all this stuff. But I was spending 4 or 5 hours on my hands and knees in a suit, archiving books, and then also equally spend
Yeah.
another 4 or 5 hours looking at a 200-page contract and having to spot the spelling errors. And for me, 9 years ago, that was still bonkers.
Yeah.
And there was no initiative to look. There might have been a few things going on, but there was no real initiative to aggressively adopt technology. And this was a very what you'd probably regard as a cutting edge law firm.
Right. No, I mean
So
that
it
kind.
begs it
Yeah.
begs it begs the
Yeah.
question because it's almost the view that okay, well if we bring in tech, then we can service clients quicker and it's bills per hour. So we don't want to do that. But actually, it seems like it's flipped. So one, I guess, why do you think we've seen that noticeable uptick? Again, COVID is quite an obvious example for a lot of these
Mm.
verticals because it accelerated transformation. But there's a wider picture in that, I think. And do you think as a result, because it is such slow adopting, that you have to be quite careful in how you balance automation and human expertise and your solutions and products for litigators and law firms?
It's interesting. So that question is one that I get asked most often at law schools, actually, because young professionals who are going to enter the space
Uh,
are very often nervous about, are you building tools that are going to take away eventual billables that I might have?
yeah.
And is that going to be a problem? The way I answer that is in two ways. I think the first thing is that I actually think the most of the tooling, like we were just speaking to, I think a lot of it is going to come down to the fact that um, quality control and upping the level and quality of the work itself will be a key component in this. So if you're getting at higher quality work, that will demand both machine and human interaction. The example you gave of the 200-page contract, let's take that even a little bit further. The
Hmm.
average, wrongful termination employment case
Yeah.
in the United States or the UK or wherever we are, thousands and thousands of pages worth of emails, Slacks, Teams messages, calls, other things where people are looking for small things. If you think you will go through all of the digital detritus of our modern lives without any kind of machine assistance, I would say you're doing a disservice to your client trying
Hmm.
to find facts and information. Like you said, like to at what point do you say, okay, getting on your hands and knees inside a war room with piles of 12,000 emails that you're supposed to go through? At what point is that still the most efficacious thing you could do for the client? And
Yeah.
that would point me to the second point, which is that I always tell people too, clients are going to drive this legal. Yes, it's a special market, but it's still a market and clients have choices. And I think if I'm a firm and I go to client and say, I'm using the best technology possible, I think that puts me in a far better position to win their business and more of their business than it did otherwise. Um, and so I don't know if it necessarily slims down the overall amount of work. I mean, there's not enough lawyers right now to
Mm,
accommodate the amount of legal work that's out there. That's already a problem that's long since existed. And also wages for support staff. You can't just hire up now to fix those kinds of imbalances. Um, I think there's more than enough legal work out there. If you say, instead of spending 2 hours reading all of those emails we just mentioned,
mm,
I'm going to have a machine read through all those emails in a couple minutes. I'm going to spend 2 hours on the emails that are most impactful for your case and strategizing.
yeah,
I think there are plenty of clients who actually say, yeah, that makes more sense to me.
yeah,
Um, so I think it's about if you're focusing on the quality of the work and the quality of the output, you will have no problem convincing people to go in for the fees. If you say though, yeah, I'm just going to have a machine do it anyway, and I'm just going to kind of step aside for a few minutes, yeah, then I think you'll get into issues about would people want to pay for that. So it's really
yeah,
just a question of where you want to put the time, attention, and effort. And like anything else, if somebody just wants to pull a widget and think it's a magic button to get the work done, I
mm,
don't think they'll do as well. But if it means people spending more time on the actual professional side of professional services and working with clients and supporting them and acting as guides for them, I think people would definitely want that to think their attorney is doing more. I'll give you an example. Somebody said to me, well, if it's your AI in Outlook, for example, responding to my AI,
mm,
what's the value of my interaction there? And I said, but maybe that's a problem. That like is the real value just in flipping emails back and forth, right?
yeah,
Um, it can present good questions about where the value from the work comes, and I think it'll shift, and people find ways to mitigate that all the time when different technology changes the way people work. And I think in legal, it'll that my general impression, although I'm not an optimist about most things, and I tend to be misanthropic, I think in this case, it's just going to produce better legal work. So,
mm.
yeah.
Interesting. A question I wanted to ask more, again, bigger picture, in the last 5 years, we've seen companies like Disco and LegalZoom and DocuSign, iManage, Clio. There's a startup coming into the landscape now, starting to feel it's definitely not overcrowded, but it's the most weeks that I check the funding, a legal tech is receiving funding. Hence why I'm doing a
Yeah.
podcast focused on it, and a lot of my clients from a recruitment standpoint are legal techs too. But as coming into this market, breaking into the legal tech market to differentiate themselves, what advice do you have? You've seen a lot, and coming into it, AI has to be the one of the main plays. I mean, how should they be thinking about one, differentiating themselves, and two, integrating AI into their platforms to create real value for their users? Do you think there's things that we're still missing? I mean, of course, there's things that there's gaps in missing, but for you, is there any obvious ones that you see there?
I think first with respect to jumping in the market, there's going to be just a tsunami of continued entrance into the space.
Mm,
I really welcome that. I think there's also going to be, I think what you'll see from kind of the um, I don't know. Whenever you have a period like this of what's going on with AI, you'll have a lot of effervescence, new, companies entering the space. I think you'll also see some consolidation, right?
yeah.
Because a lot of people entering the space will find out it's very hard, but then also find out like legal remains a long play type of tech.
Mm,
Um, Even with the excitement over AI, acceptance and adoption cycles in legal tech remain long. That's 3 to 5 years usually is what they average. That's longer than the average SaaS contract.
yeah.
So you've got to be in a long play to service the customers. The the only winning formula I've ever seen with any kind of tech in the space is it doesn't change because of AI, which is like I was saying before, a total obsession with the feedback of clients
Mm,
and responding to what they're looking at. So I don't think that changes. I think that the most interesting things we'll see in the space, like I said, are going to be some smash ups of things that we're not expecting. Some areas where AI will make it easier to interface with different parts of a legal tech stack that used to be considered disparate. Um, and so what I'm looking forward to is that I think we're past the year and a half of just GPT wrappers in the
yeah.
tooling and people digging back into how to solve hard problems. And it's uh, it's very cliche. and very, very true that like you have to solve hard problems and do the hard work to stay in any space. And legal, that tends to be especially true. So if somebody out there is finding what they find to be a really difficult problem and you think AI easily solves it, you probably need to look at the problem again. I mean, Gavin, the one thing I would say to people is when you're looking at problems too, I'm pretty obsessed with this. On my internal team,
Mhm.
we have just in my direct reports, we have a principal developer. Um, we have someone who is trained as an attorney. We have someone who is trained as an accountant, someone who is trained as a linguist. Um, all those people look at these things from different angles.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons that's essential to do is because everybody's going to see something different. And you know, what is it Shakespeare said? Eye to ride renders form. You got to tilt your head, cock it sideways, and look at the thing askew and a different way than you looked at it before. Otherwise, you're not going to really see the problem. If it's so obvious that it's sitting there right in front of your face, it's usually not that. It's that you got to tilt your head and say, that wasn't even the thing that was causing the problem in the first place. So,
Very
yeah,
poetic. Love
a
it.
philosophy grad,
And to that point, that eclectic mix of people on the team,
Mm.
uh, do you think that has also helped massively in terms of how you sold? You mentioned you had challenges selling to legal techs, and most legal techs will have challenges selling to the industry. Do you think bringing in, I'm assuming when that with that team of, what is it, 300 plus in the business now,
Mhm.
there's previous people from corporate law in-house now, and there's the whole mix of accountants, et cetera, and you've got tech people. Do you think to really understand how to sell to the industry, you have to have people from industry in the business?
I think in a very high demand knowledge SaaS. So like in vertical SaaS that is, places a really high demand on industry knowledge,
Mhm.
it seems essential. I don't know if it is ultimately, but it has been for us. I don't know how we would have done that without bringing in a lot of people from these different domains and areas of law and
Mhm.
been able to really speak to them because the dig in time, the apprenticeship in legal tech, it's nearly as long often for people as the apprenticeship into law. It's like people get
Mhm.
into a firm, the first few years, you don't really know what you're doing.
Mhm.
That happens in legal tech too, right? People get in and it's not something where you just jump in from a different type of SaaS and feel at home immediately, know the landscape, the players, the personalities, and all those things. So I think bringing in a lot of people who have touched legal in some ways and a bunch of different parts of legal has
Mhm.
really enriched the team and its ability to speak to end users and our customers. I think yeah, it's been really important for us.
And, kind of looking forwards, because again, I think when I speak to people outside of the space that aren't maybe familiar with legal tech, but they obviously know that at the heart of it, document reviews, drafting contracts quicker, automating workflows, increasing and putting the human more in the loop to focus on the more strategic human issues. But outside of that, because obviously that's B2B, and yes, it affects us, the consumer or the person being represented by the litigator. But outside of that, do you think there's any emerging technologies? And we did touch on this, and you said you've never touched it. Like for me, I see a big embedded play for legal services, but I can obviously understand and appreciate the security and data privacy issues with doing that. But when we talk about the B2B to C model, it's going to affect, for example, myself, Joe Blogs. Is there anything that you're kind of seeing there? Virtual law firms, the price of a lawyer is super expensive. How do we put the law in the people's hands when need it the most? And we're not always so reliant on, well, the high costs of legal
Yeah.
services. You see in the
No, it's
next
really
5 to 10 years some big plays there.
it's a really good question because it's super complicated, so I like it. Because the fact is that on the one hand, there's probably a lot of space for that of ways to make that possible, but it's also a little bit dicey. The example I always give people is because because the tools of law are language, a lot of people think they intuitively understand parts of the law that they usually don't understand. This is a dangerous kind of thing normally. Like people will
Yeah.
read their contract and think, yeah, I know what this says. And then find out 2 years later, you had no idea what you signed, right? So because it's a tool that it happens in natural language, a lot of people are kind of tricked into thinking they understand. And the equivalent danger there I would give is everybody has had a cold one day, gone to WebMD and thought they're going to die, right? It's just everybody's seen that fact of modern life. You try to self-diagnose over the internet, things go wonky, right? So there is a danger of uh, thinking about how do we do this in the right way that is both useful to consumers, but also protects people from thinking they have more knowledge about a subject than they do, right? Because that, like I said, that happens with medicine right now. It's a problem, and people spread crazy ideas about how they're going to treat themselves with things. And right now, um, I see all the time on, subreddits of somebody saying, "See, I sent this back to my employer. I wrote a legal letter, and all I needed was ChatGPT." And you look at it and you go, "Oh, this is not going well." So
Yeah.
it's, there's got to be some. What I would say is this, though. I think if we can leverage more of the technology to make available more knowledge about what is available for people or what is possible within the law, it makes a lot of sense. One of the things I've heard people talk about most often, which would be very helpful, is if there are ways to help people engage in using potentially legal tools to help, for example, resolve or mitigate disputes that mean you could find alternative ways out of clogging the courts with that. So if you could
Mm.
take lower stakes legal items that would give people more access to finding fair
Yeah.
resolution outside of the courts. That seems to make a lot of sense. One of the reasons I think that makes a lot of sense is because we already do that in our ordinary lives all the time. Like if you pay a vendor through Stripe and you use Klarna or whatever different services you're using, and you say I never got the good, they're essentially already helping you engage in a dispute resolution, right, without taking it to court, hopefully. So we
Yeah.
have more interactions with things like that. So like tenant landlord dispute makes sense if we could try to put some of those things in safer spaces that would allow people to say, you know, this third party is acting like a digital safe space where we both agree to negotiate within it. In fact, I've seen really creative uses of this where that are illegal in the United States. Actually, it's a problem.
Right.
It's practicing law without a license. So in
Yeah.
California, for example, eBay, there were issues with people using eBay to solve their no-fault divorces. Even though eBay wasn't trying to practice law, people were trying to use it to solve their dispute about how do we separate our assets. So it really depends on the jurisdiction you're in. Um, but I know I think in the Netherlands already you can do that kind of thing with no fault divorce of having a machine kind of try to help you separate the assets. Uh, I think on a lot of daily disputes, if we could declutter those items where the stakes aren't as high, um, it makes sense. I will tell you that I think in things like criminal matters or things that involve people's
Very
um,
hard. Very
life
hard.
and liberty, yeah, I th- I think at
Think,
least for
think,
the
think for the
yeah,
strictly liable stuff like car,
yeah,
you know, road traffic accidents or the stuff that you said, things that are quite
yeah,
you could probably solve outside. There's
yeah,
definitely play there. I think, I think law firms in the next five, what do I know, but I think it would be lovely and exciting to see law firms actually introducing like AI agents that look like you and I, and they jump on a
yeah.
call with them and say, like, and I worked in insurance for 2 years there
Hmm.
exclusively, and the claims process, so much of that can be automated, and the claims process
Right.
is obviously very similar. So the human should only really come in the loop after all details have been captured, after we've processed it. But instead, I think law firms could probably learn a little bit from maybe the insurtech side on the claims process. It's quite similar in terms of being represented at the first stages.
Yeah, and I think that is a good point. And like I said, those smaller disputes or items like that also, I think that would make the justice system better overall because it is flooded with so many matters that probably don't have to be there. That you would get a dedication of more resources to the things where they're very high stakes. Um,
Mm,
and
agreed.
insurance, when you're bringing that up, I mean, insurers are famous for knowing, exactly how many hours from a particular incident happening and a claim to what
Yeah.
the proposed payout is, the longer you leave that payout not coming through, the higher the demand for the amount becomes, right? But if you issue it much faster, you usually get an acceptance of what the amount is, right? Those are kinds of things that insurance has been putting into their calculations for years, where law has done a lot less so, but with so many firms embracing legal tech, there's just a lot more data now that's available that people have about how their clients respond to certain things or what kind of offer would be something they'd be willing to accept. Whereas insurance has been doing that for a long time.
Well, yeah, that's you can't innovate without the data, and it's just
Yeah.
seems like you need to put left foot, right foot in legal tech, and over the years the data will build, and as you say, maybe more use cases come out of it. Kind, I'm conscious of the time that we have, but
Yeah.
as a kind of finishing piece, I wanted to part of this podcast is yes, I like to talk about industry trends, the successes, the challenges of scaling a startup, problems selling into industry, but also from a kind of leadership and growth aspect for those that are on the market. It's been a super tough market. I'm always interested to get people's insights and how they have evolved through their path because the world of startups is unclear. The career paths are unclear. There's no real
Mhm.
metrics to get you to ABC like there is in big corporate land. So like you've
Yeah.
transitioned from academia pretty quickly to a leadership role. Now,
Mhm.
like what's the lessons you've learned in that super quick journey? And, do you think it's an unusual route you've got? You've not went the senior
Mhm.
IC, individual contributor, and worked your way up. You've kind of fast tracked, probably because of your brand and what you've built and the talks that you do. But what advice do you have for people looking to grow their career in tech and startups?
I think people spend a lot of time trying to do two things. One is that they they forget the essential and ever-present fact of what a role other people play in that trajectory,
Mm,
and how important it is to invest an immense amount of yourself and your time into just working with your colleagues and understanding how they function, and make sure that the roles, the ideas you're building are really it everybody likes to say, um, rising tide, that it lifts all ships. But a lot of people, when they get on the path to wanting to lead, be successful, they find themselves, whether on purpose or not, trying to figure out how to. The old example I give is, you have two cows, I have one. What should I do? I can go out and try to earn another cow, but the quickest route is to kill one of your cows, right? And I I have seen organizationally historically over the years, like a lot of people think that killing your cow is the fastest way to get what they want. And the crazy part about that is you're part of the same organization. So action you take like that is only hurting yourself, but um, it trips a lot of people up. So people spend a lot of time thinking through strategies that are advantageous on one side. If you're working in a company and building it up for your clients, none of it's a zero sum game. If it is, you're playing the
yeah.
wrong game, because you'll eat the organization inside out. So you got to be very determined, even when you have to do stuff that you think, why in the world am I doing this? You got to stick with it with the long-term view of it's got to ultimately be in the company's interests. And if you can start from the beginning with that idea, it'll take you a lot further than figuring it out at the end and saying, now I'm a leader. Now I'll look at the big picture of what's going on in the company. You got to start with all the individual initiatives, saying, I'm looking out for the best interest of the company, and it actually would serve you better. So that's one thing that I would say. The other thing is that some people neglect the necessity of being a good generalist in areas. Everybody likes to play to their strengths, but it's really being a generalist to know enough about the components of what other teams and people are doing is the difference maker between understanding how allocation of resources in one area versus another are really going to impact the business. And that goes down to, you may think you have a brilliant idea for a product, but if it turns out that product's an area that's atrocious and notorious for difficult to market into and high marketing costs, what are your likelihoods to succeed? Now you can say, well, I'm not in marketing, that's their problem to deal with. But if you're, a product lead and haven't thought through that, then are you really figuring out on behalf of the company? And so, um, a little bit of generalism goes a long way. And that's, taking simple human curiosity into what your colleagues are doing, enough to know, not that you know all the skill set they have, you don't have to become an expert in everyone's domain within the company, but you need to know how all those pieces fit together. Because if you can't see something from the moment an SDR cold calls a client to the moment that client re-signs a contract, it's really hard to figure out how do I create and build new things that contribute to the overall value of the company. So I would say starting with that bigger perspective and generalism of curiosity about other people's roles that you think that's not really my jam. Well, it doesn't matter if digital marketing is not your jam. That's part of how the company runs. So you've got to at least have some awareness of what is driving the work they do. That's the advice I would give.
And then I think that just the finishing point, off the back of that, but then I think that comes back to psychological safety. So if you're in a
Mhm.
company that maybe the marketing team, they don't want someone from software engineering coming over and asking what they're doing, they're like, what do you care? You're just writing code. So
Yeah.
do you think it's equally on the individual as it is on the company to create that type of environment for people to be generalists, or do you think the person should and could just be able to grab it by the bullhorns regardless of culture?
Makes it way better if the culture is set up that way.
Yeah,
But either way, it's still on the person to push in. And you
yeah,
have to find that ground to push in, whether that's taking those colleagues out for a lunch that don't understand why the hell you want to talk to them,
hmm
or
hmm
stopping by when they have their weekly meetings and saying hi. Um, Human discomfort is a really big thing, and especially post COVID, a lot of people got really uncomfortable talking to their colleagues sometimes.
yeah,
Um, Nothing replaces that within an organization of the human glue that keeps things moving. So an organization that sets that tone with the culture is the best thing possible. That's something we try to do here, but nothing replaces the person who wants to take the extra 5 minutes to do that. Because usually people end up surprised at how, people enjoy interacting with someone who takes interest in what they do.
yeah. Yeah, well, look, love it. Great piece to end it on, Cain. Thank you again for joining me.
My
It's
pleasure.
been great to have you on.
All right. Thanks, Gavin. Have a good one.
Cheers.